The Trump administration pushed ahead with its census efforts on Friday, which have alarmed advocates for migrants and rallied his political base. But the inclusion of a citizenship question remains unsettled. The latest move, coming days after President Trump broke with his administration's lawyers and urged a standoff, came in a Friday filing in a Maryland court, where Justice Department lawyers said the administration is pursuing a citizenship question. President Trump also told reporters that he's considering an executive order to tag on that citizenship question, even as the census is now being printed.
We can also add an addition on, so we can start the printing now and maybe do an addendum after we get a positive decision. So we're working on a lot of things, including an executive order.
Joining me tonight, Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times. Amna Nawaz, national correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. Shauna Thomas, Washington bureau chief for Vice News. And Brian Bennett, White House correspondent for Time Magazine. Peter, we have the census right here from 2010. It's a piece of paper,
right,
but it's also a broader debate about this country, about its future. Why does it matter?
Yeah, it's a great question. It sounds like the wonkiest debate in Washington history, right? Whether one question or not should be on a piece of paper that goes out to everybody in the country. And yet, it's so fundamental. Why is it fundamental? It's about two things. It's about power, and it's about money. And the reason it's about power and money is because we divide America up into districts based on this document, based on how people respond to this census. And whether you have more districts or fewer districts, whether you have more money from the appropriations or less, depends on how many people are said to live in your community. If some people don't choose to answer this census because they're afraid of answering a citizenship question, that will have an impact. And the president said something today, too, I thought that was very revealing. I think for the first time he had acknowledged, or at least seemed to acknowledge, that he wants citizenship to be the basis for redistricting. Right now, it's based on total population, how many people live in a community, whether they're citizens or not. He seemed to suggest today in a comment that he thinks it ought to be based on citizenship, which would radically change the balance of power in this country.
Amna, you report on immigration every day, just got back from a reporting trip. Peter mentioned how this could deter some non-citizens, migrants, from participating in the census. What does your reporting reveal about that?
Well, there's definitely some fear already, right? Just the possibility of a question like this, in which we haven't had since 1950 in this country, has sowed some kind of discontent, some fear, a little skepticism too. And there's always been that within recently arrived or immigrant or non-citizen communities in America, a little bit of skepticism about engaging with federal authorities. Why is this information necessary? How is it going to be used? There was a lot of that when this was first raised with this administration, particularly because of a lot of the anti-immigrant language that the president ran on, campaigned on, and has continued throughout his presidency. So honestly, some people are saying even though the question may or may not be added to the actual census, the damage may be done. The fear is already kind of there. People who may be legally here, by the way, we're not just talking about people who are here as undocumented residents. People who are legally here, maybe seeking citizenship, may be a little bit reluctant to participate anyway.
And even the plaintiffs in their filings over the last couple of days in the Maryland court, they mentioned this thing about if the president tweets what he tweeted out, where they had to reverse course and say, yes, we are going to try to still get the question in, that could, just from a media perspective, cause more fear in those communities. And people will start to believe, even if the question isn't actually on that piece of paper when we all get it, that they think it's there. And even that can have a chilling effect on our ability to count the entire country.
And the Census Bureau's own experts have said that in their conclusions, that it could lead to people to sit out the process.
Well, so what they did was they compared it to what's known as the American Community Survey, which is something that goes out every year and does a portion, like a small mini census that then you use algorithms and math and things I don't understand to try to project how many people are out there. And they do include a citizenship question on it. And they compared that data to the data from the 2010 census. And basically were like, we think that the reason why less people respond here is because of this question.
So why is the president doing this, Brian? You recently sat down with President Trump in the Oval Office for a Time Magazine cover story. Is this all about 2020 seizing on his signature issue?
There is definitely a political element to this. The president does best with his base and his supporters when he looks like he's fighting for issues that he campaigned on, and one of the signature issues is more restrictive immigration policies. And so by picking this fight and looking like he's going to take every step he possibly can to get this question onto the census. He's showing his base that he's willing to fight for what he campaigned on, and that polls very well. It also keeps the issue in the headlines, which his campaign is using to recruit new people and build up their voter base.
What about the executive order idea? Chief Justice John Roberts, he concluded that the Trump administration needs to provide a better rationale if they want to get the Supreme Court's support in a decision for including the citizenship question. In the meantime, the president's talking about executive action. Is that a reality legally and politically?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not 100% sure why it would be different to have the president sign an order as opposed to his cabinet officer sign an order, except that it does make a difference, I think, in terms of timing, in terms of the administrative process. There are things that the Commerce Department, Census Bureau have to go through to add the question that might not be applicable if the president signs an executive order. So if they get a quick ruling from the Supreme Court, the argument would be they could move faster off of his order. It also presumably imputes his power more. It goes directly to the president's Article 2 power under the Constitution, which he is the chief of the executive branch, not the Commerce Secretary, not the Census Bureau. And that might give it more authority, more resonance with justices who care about executive authority.
But it's worth reiterating, they will go to court again.
They will.
I mean, they're still in court about it, number one. Even if he has an executive order, someone will sue, because that's what happens with almost all of his executive orders. And they will have to, and they may fast track it. And they fast tracked this to try to get the census because the government said that it needed to start printing in July.
And on that point, you say they'll keep suing. In part, this is because critics of the president's position say the rationale has already been underscored by discovered evidence from computer files from a Republican strategist, the late Thomas Hoffler, who died last summer. His estranged daughter found hard drives that said if Republicans moved on the census in this way, it would help them politically. And so there's a feeling among the president's critics who are in court that the
This
rationale
is for discriminatory purposes. Yeah, that is how they feel. Now, Justice John Roberts didn't allow, basically, the government has already sort of said, or the courts have already sort of said, we don't totally know if we agree with that rationale, and that isn't why John Roberts sent this back. But it does seem that the judge in Maryland now is saying, okay, we can go into discovery about whether it is discriminatory or not. So that's already part of the case.
And you look at the citizenship question, it was included 50, 60 years ago in the Census Bureau, in the whole document. What do we know about why it was taken off? There's reporting from NBC that it was because they wanted to make sure people participated.
That's right. Yeah, the goal was, this is, to Peter's point originally, this is how we figure out where the money goes. And wherever the money goes, the power follows. And America is a completely different country today than it was back in 1950. They recognized that. They decided participation was more important than determining citizenship at the time, and that's why the ACS filled in the blanks on some of the citizenship questions. But I don't want to get lost in this conversation that the administration's original rationale for putting that in, the case that they publicly stated from the Commerce Secretary on down, was this will help us enforce the Voting Rights Act. That's why we're including this, is because we want to protect minority
And the Chief Justice said that was contrived, to use his words. I'm going to mention the Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross. Is he on thin ice with President Trump?
So President Trump was asked that question today, and President Trump said, no, he's comfortable with Ross and his job is not in jeopardy. But this
You believe that?
I don't believe it. I think this does cause another rift between the two of them. They've been at odds before when Wilbur Ross came up with some bad headlines for Trump, and so I think this creates another strain. I'm sure there's a feeling on Trump that Wilbur Ross could have given many different explanations for why they were going forward with this question, one that would hold up better in court.
Wasn't he just following the law?
Yeah, he's trying to find a rationale that would be acceptable to the courts, and the courts obviously have a great investment in enforcing the Voting Rights Act. But it just didn't seem, it seemed transparent on its face, and you didn't need the lost files from the Republican consultant to understand that there is a potential partisan motivation here. Both parties try to game the system as best they can through these districting exercises. We're about to have a once-a-decade count that will influence who controls the districts and the rewriting of the districts for the next 10 years. So, of course, a lot is at stake here.
What can Democrats do? What are their options here?
I mean, There is some talk, though I don't think this would get through the Senate, that you could actually maybe write a law and say, hey, the decennial census doesn't include a citizenship question. They could go down that route in Congress. But short of that, this is just going to have to play out in the courts.